Hello, friends. Today we'll be talking about Mercury squaring Saturn. From Sag to Pisces, this one last square, we're here. But before starting, I want to slow things down a little bit in that Saturnine fashion. And that's because this is one of those transits, especially any transit with Mercury, we underestimate it. So this is not the usual square that we have from Mercury to Saturn. And at a first glance, this does not look like an exceptional square. But this square of Mercury to Saturn is different. And that's because of the way that it's falling into a larger sequence of time. So this is not a beginning, this is a closing statement, period. And in the upcoming videos, we're going to be talking about everything about Capricorn. And if you want to catch those videos, please subscribe so YouTube sends you a notification. So now let's get to the depth and the bottom of this transit of everything passing through Sagittarius and everything squaring that Saturn. And to understand this Mercury square, this Mercury transit, and why it matters so much, we have to look at the order of things the way that they have occurred. So if you think back, first we had Mars in Sag, which actually inaugurated this fire sign and that fire era that I keep talking about that is ahead of us, fully entrenched and in place by next summer. And then Mars moved forward and squared Saturn, and this was about action meeting resistance. It was instinct colliding with limitations. And then we had Sun come in and square that same Saturn. And that was our identity and our sense of self being tested. It was about our sense of self and our ego realizing things that we can no longer carry forward. Then we had Venus come and square that Saturn. And with that, we saw how we had to come in to engage with love, relationships, the way that we're connected to different facets of our lives. And all of these three planets were trying to inspire us to get to some sort of a new meaning and understanding. And I want you guys to think about this. Mercury is the fastest planet. Usually Mercury is leading the pack. In this instance, we had Mars leading the pack, and Mercury is the last one. And that's because of Mercury's retrograde in Sag going all the way back into Scorpio. And this in itself is strange. This is another factor, not just the last conversation with Saturn, but the fact that Mercury, the intellect and the mind is coming last. When was the last time in your life you acted before you had a thought? Well, unless if you're an Aries. The point I'm trying to make is that the mind, the intellect, our thoughts are always coming first. In this instance, is coming last. So we're talking about the inability so far to speak, to interpret, and to explain things. And if you think about that intellect, it was going from a fire sign where it's very much about thinking back into a water sign where we were forced to re-engage with our emotions to think through it. So it was showing us that there were things underneath the surface that couldn't be spoken with such ease. So we had to go back into the inner depth, in the inner psyche, before Mercury could re-emerge in Sag to be able to articulate itself. And now Mercury has to meet Saturn. So we can think of this as the intellect still not acting in real time, not speaking in real time. Rather, we're trying to catch up with what we're trying to explain, articulate, and understand, to decipher. So in a lot of ways, our meaning is not coming forth alongside of experience. And that means when we pay attention, this square is not asking us to ask, what should I do? That question belonged to Mars. We're not asking, who am I anymore? That was for Sun. The Mercury within us now wants to know what it can say honestly, now that everything has already happened. So this isn't the usual Mercury-Saturn square where this can actually denote a lot of rational thinking, where it forces us to plan things. We're forced to actually, in this time, take an account of things. This is an accounting square. And I would argue Saturn's not trying to teach anything at this point. Saturn is also wanting Mercury to close some file once and for all. Figure it out, close that file, put it on a shelf. And a lot of this accounting has to do with us now sitting back, thinking through in terms of how am I located and positioned in my life after everything that's been said and done, after everything that Saturn has already dissolved, after everything that Jupiter has nurtured and grown in our heart. This is now the time to reflect back and to understand ourselves through some spectrum of time. And just to bring a different perspective, to deepen our perspective about this dialogue, this conversation, and what it all means, I want to take us into the two nakshatras that Mercury and Saturn are sitting in. Saturn is currently in the nakshatra of Purva Bhadrapada. Purva Bhadrapada runs to about 27 degrees of tropical Pisces. And when Saturn retrograded back into Pisces, it went all the way back to Purva Bhadrapada and is only 1 degree away from going into the next nakshatra. So Saturn's wrapping things up in this nakshatra right now too. And this nakshatra is kind of a difficult nakshatra because it's saying that we desire the worlds, but in this nakshatra, you're supposed to gather the world, everything you've achieved, everything you attained, everything that you thought meant something to you, and bring it into the sacrificial altar to burn it. So this is a nakshatra about purification. And the reason for this is that this nakshatra wants to show us that the appearance of things in the world are not their essence. But in order to get to the essence, you have to burn the appearance. And Saturn has been creating so much dissatisfaction in this nakshatra with our attainment, our achievements, who we've become, what we are, that there's this urge that I want to take it all to this altar and burn it. I want to understand the deeper meaning of who I am, what my life is about, what it is that I'm doing. So in a lot of ways, as I've talked about this in a number of videos about Saturn now, Saturn has been stripping away our dreams, all of our fantasies. Saturn's asking us what's left when all aspiration has been stripped away. So Saturn has been dissolving everything that's been without substance in our lives. So this is the kind of Saturn that's in a dialogue with Mercury right now. And before bringing it all together, let's look at where Mercury is. Mercury is in a very rough nakshatra too. It's in the nakshatra of Mula. And I say rough because this is a difficult nakshatra. And this nakshatra also doesn't negotiate with appearances. It doesn't care about the mere face, the front stage, the appearance, or the convenience, nor is it interested in refining surface meaning of things. This nakshatra with its deity, Niriti, it wants to go into the depth of things. It wants to go to the root of things where there is darkness, no light is being shed. But that kernel of truth is deep within. What this nakshatra wants to do is to show us what's untrue, what's corrupted. It is interested in uprooting corruption and what is untrue. So it wants to show us our corrupted belief systems, our so-called truth that were never true, or other people's untruth that has plagued our lives. We want to uproot it at this time. That's what the intellect is being employed to do. It wants to show us how our explanations or the explanations that others are giving to us. Look where the sign of Sag is sitting in your chart. Is it in the sector that belongs to the self or to others? So you'll know if it's referring to you or to people around you. But it wants to show us how these explanations that we've been entrenched in have been about avoidance, fear, or wanting to hide the truth. So this nakshatra goes deep to expose. It wants to expose what's false inside out. It wants to uproot and annihilate, even violently. So Mercury is not sitting in the square having a casual conversation about what inspires it, the way Sag can inspire that kind of a thinking and that mode of being. This Mercury is arriving with a shovel. This is now the intellect refusing to decorate reality. This is a Mercury that refuses to be inspired for the sake of the next dopamine hit. So now we can go into the dialogue, the actual dialogue they're having, bring this together. This is Mercury, our intellect, the Mercury within us that wants to uproot what is no longer true. And Saturn on the other side is trying to dissolve everything that's not real. This is the Mercury within us sitting in the middle of our life, asking ourselves, where the hell did this idea come from? Why do I think it's true? These ideas I have about myself, about the world, about the other, where did they come from? Why are they in my life? We're trying to get to the root of things right now. And Saturn's asking something much heavier. Saturn's bringing time in. Saturn's asking, what has this untrue done to you? Who have you become because of it? What is going to be because of it in the times ahead? So Saturn's bringing that notion of cause and effect right now, showing us the karma and the fruits of what we have sown, what we're reaping right now. And because it's a square, it's showing us the more unpleasant aspects of it. And I want you to realize this is not a conversation about hope. This is a conversation where these two planets are trying to figure out where we're durable, what can last, what can now stay. This is about knowing what's necessary, absolutely necessary, and what can survive in our life now. What can survive time? What can survive pressure? What can survive consequences? And this square is also showing us that meaning is never enough on its own. And in order to understand this, we have to understand the sequence of this aspect, the way this conversation's arranged. There's a structure to every aspect. And that means we have to look at who's responding to whom, from what position. And this brings us to the next point. And that is Mercury is in the superior position. So Mercury, Saturn's here. Camera's probably the other way around, so excuse me, I never get this right. So Mercury's behind Saturn, Saturn's ahead of it, and Mercury's trying to overcome Saturn. So Mercury's in the superior position. That's the nature of this square. So this is in Saturn so powerful that it can silence our thoughts. This is our thoughts actually confronting consequences now. This is where intellect is realizing something very difficult. We're starting to realize that some ideas and ideals in our lives were false and they failed us. And not because we misunderstood them, but because at their core, they were not true. And because they were not true, Saturn is not allowing it to live in reality. They cannot survive reality. So in this moment, reality is pushing back at us very hard. So this becomes a moment that requires us to take a little bit of self-inventory. For everything that's related to that part of your chart, that house where Sag is sitting. And we have to realize Sag by itself loves to create meaning, to designate meaning, higher meaning, to inspire. It loves having a vision. So there's a part of our intellect, our thinking process that wants to gravitate that way because it's in the domain of Sag. But Saturn's asking a harder question, is asking Mercury. Reality is asking our intellect, our mind right now. Can your meaning, the one that you're making up in your mind right now, can it endure me? I am time. So Saturn, by asking that question, is asking us the question of measurements. How measured are you? These aspirations, inspiration, ideals, ideas that you have, can you scale them? Can you stretch them through time? Can they last? And this is important. I'll talk about this at the end of this video. This is important because we're going into that time period where everything's about air and fire. We're wrapping up earth and water. And you know, Saturn in Pisces right now with the square is not asking Mercury to abandon our vision. Saturn's not dumb. Saturn understands how we human beings are. That Saturn drive within us understands this. So it doesn't want us to dim our vision, but it's asking the Mercury, the intellect within us, to refine it, to understand its scale throughout time. Saturn's just letting us know right now, superficial inspiration, motivation, determination, these things will not work through long stretches of time. They might be good for the moment. You'll get inspired to do one act, but if you have this goal, you have this long-term project, you need to understand the truth, the essence, and the core of it. That's how you're going to make it through time. And you know, this is kind of like Saturn preparing us for when it goes into Aries. And I've talked about this in other videos. A lot of false ignitions, and we have to try, retry, and work harder. And if we don't know what we're working towards, we're going to face enormous amount of exhaustion when that transit's occurring for that 2.5 years, 2 years now. But in this moment, this aspect is actually quite subtle. So if we don't pick up the messages being conveyed, the modes and moods that are being created, if we can't read them, if we can't understand what the core truth is right now, we will fall into the shadow of this square. And as I've said in many other videos, even softer aspects have shadows, let alone the squares. It requires a lot of effort and self-awareness. But let's talk about some of the shadows very quickly. And I want you to know that the shadow here is not about limitations, the way we always assume with Saturn, but because of where Saturn's sitting in that nakshatra, in the sign of Pisces as well. It's talking about an intellectual collapse if we don't understand the truth. For instance, in this moment, we might find ourselves passing a lot of self-judgments, and all of it is masked as a sense of realism. This is where cynicism is mistaken for wisdom. This is a time that if you're not dealing with truth, you'll find that you're telling yourself to shut up. You're prematurely silencing yourself or other people. This is a time where you might look at your life or someone else's life and be like, this thing doesn't really matter. Just gloss everything over. And if we think about it, these are all statements of rationalization. They're not Saturn's truth nor Mercury's truth at the moment. Neither of these planets right now are asking us to abandon things, but it's asking us to abandon false meaning. And you have to realize this is very hard because that means we have given things a definition, which is a Mercury process. And based on that definition, we have built an entire reality and belief system around it. To actually deconstruct that, to let it dissolve, to burn it at that altar, to get to the core essence and the truth of it, you might come out and see that, oh my God, all the things that made my life functional, they don't have an application anymore. So sometimes, even though our meanings and our definitions are false, they're still creating this sandcastle, this ground that we can stand on, even though it has no foundation. So with that said, let's see what lesson we can extract from this square. And from the get-go, I want to say the lesson is not about optimism that Sag wants, nor is it about pessimism that Saturn usually wants to bring to the forefront. When we put Saturn and Mercury together, or when they're in a dialogue through an aspect, as I was saying earlier, we get a very rational mind. So this aspect is asking us to be precise. This is about precision. So it's about precisely looking at ourselves with great precision, being rational, being logical, to see some of the meanings that we've designated to our lives, the stories that we've constructed for ourselves, some ways of thinking and some habits of our minds that have become our truth. It's time for them to come to their ends. They need to be dissolved and uprooted. This is about learning to recognize when an explanation has reached its natural limit, it is also time to bring that to its end. Because you see sometimes people just arguing for the sake of argument. It's like the point was already made. What is this habit of the mind that is insisting to continue? Sometimes not concluding our thoughts is in itself a failure on our part. It's not being measured. It's not understanding consequences. In this moment, we really have to sit back and realize things that no longer make sense in our lives. And I think this selectivity is very important. This is one last chance that you choose and you select what needs to be dissolved. Nothing else is given an aspect to Saturn, and Saturn's not aspecting anything else. This is the last bit of aspects from Saturn or to Saturn. From here forth, Saturn will dissolve what Saturn wants to dissolve. What I'm trying to say to you, put something on the table that must go for Saturn to dissolve from now till February 13th. Give it something to dissolve. Don't leave it up to its own vices by turning a blind eye to things right now. And this moment is actually about holding fewer ideas. And it's about holding them with honesty. It's about refinement. It's about editing. This moment is about maturation of our thoughts and our thinking process. And one way to know this right now, it's like, what are you constantly defending? Because things that are truly true, they are the absolute truth. They don't require fighting because they're self-explanatory. They're self-evident. So if you have to force things and if you have to constantly defend things, maybe that's one of the things that you, myself, everyone, we need to put on the table. And if you think about it, letting go of these old narratives, things that are in reality draining us because we're constantly defending it, they're not upholding us. And to let it go, to bring it to the altar where Saturn's sitting right now, or handing it over to Mula to uproot it is not a loss. In reality, it is relief. It is unburdening ourselves from carrying what is untrue. Truth is always lighter than untruth. In the Egyptian stories, in that passage from this world to the next world after death, you have to meet Thoth. And he is actually the equivalent of Hermes and Mercury. And what he does, he will take your heart, he will put it on one side of the scale and put a feather on the other side. Your heart, if it's truthful, it should not weigh more than a feather. If it weighs more, you have lived a life that was untrue. So this is an opportunity right now to weigh things, to measure things, and to gravitate towards truth because it's going to take the weight off of us also. So imagine that Saturn right now is actually trying to help us free ourselves. That Saturn going to Aries, I talked about it in that Saturn direct video. That Saturn will have to go through the eye of the needle, passing through this water sign to that next fire sign. And part of that is that we cannot go in with what is untrue and lies. We have to go in light. How else are you going to sprint in Aries? How are you going to ignite and be a spark in Aries, especially with Saturn there? And I want to go here for a second to go back to Mercury as the last planet standing in a fire sign right now, where the fire era got ignited. We can see that Mercury is closing off that initial initiation of fire. And this fire began with Mars's entrance to Sag, followed by the Sun and then Venus. And fire in general is representing our will, but fire is also not complete. Its mission is not complete until it can be spoken plainly. Not something that's inspired, not something that's moralized, and not something that constantly needs to be defended. Just plain old truth. And Mercury is ending this first fire phase by asking the Mercury in us. Mercury is asking us, can you say this without performance, without grandeur? Can you say it without exaggeration, without hope doing the work of truth? Because all of these are forms of lies. Even if you're articulating the truth is plain and simple. It's straightforward. It's not dressed up as things. Itself is everything. And if it cannot, this is indicating how we are going to have a hard time moving forward in this next era coming up. And I just want to take this Mercury forward a little bit into Capricorn, because the next set of videos are all going to be about Cap stuff. An Earth sign, which is about practical application and hard work. And I want you to realize whatever that has survived the square, whether it was Mars, Sun, Venus, and now Mercury, that's the raw material we're working with right now as we got planets in Capricorn. And Mercury is part of that story. And whatever that doesn't survive cannot follow us to 2026. And that matters because what follows Capricorn is Aquarius, which is the collective field now. This means what you can clarify within yourself personally, privately, now can determine your direction in the world amongst others. And we got one of the biggest stelliums of 2026 coming up in the sign of Aquarius right at the beginning of the year. And to close this video, I like to ask you guys to like, subscribe, and share, and especially write your comments. First of all, I love to know how this whole Sag saga unfolded for you and how you feel that you made the transition now to Cap. And I always say this, we should treat the transits with a long arc, with a narrative that's ongoing, because that's how we human beings understand our stories. And if you want a reading of these transits in your own birth charts, or just to understand the blueprint that's been designated to you, you can go to the description box below. My email's there, or you can go to parisayazi.com for more information. And now to close, I want us to remember this. This is not a loud transit, but is one that matters. This is a moment that we have to understand, that we have to stop arguing time. We have to learn how to live inside of time. From moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, week by week, going all the way to year after year. We want a story that makes sense. We want to feel present. And our mind has to be aligned to what it takes to do that. Like, you can't have these inspired goals and aspirations and then have your thinking completely somewhere else. Something's untrue here. Is it your ideal or is it your thinking process? And there's another thing here right now. Sag, because it is Jupiter's sign, it has a lot to do with trust. And in some ways, we have to trust that if we let go of certain things, that what is left is enough. It's real enough for us to build on that. Sometimes less is more. This is the lesson of Saturn always. And if I have one wish for us during this transit, before we enter into a brand new year, 2026, is this, that whatever clarity arrives right now, it does not harden us. Rather, I hope that is the truth that steadies us, that what falls away does so cleanly, and what remains is simple enough to trust and strong enough to carry us forward in the times ahead. And it's a time that is supposed to be very different than from what it has been since 2023 to this year ending now, 2025. And with that said, I'm wishing you a beautiful 2026 ahead. And I look forward to us walking together past 2025 into a new year alongside each other with brand new videos. And that's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time. I'm really looking forward to 2026. Should it be this or should it be this? We're going to love 2026. Much love.